The first-class corridor of Union Station had never heard a voice like that. "Don't get on that train." Every head turned. A black man in a work shirt and scuffed boots stood at the boarding gate pointing directly at Diana Ashford, one of the most powerful women in America. Security moved fast. The whispers spread faster. But the man didn't back down. "If you get on that train," he said, "you will never come back." Behind him, a small girl held something tightly in both fists and slowly nodded. Union Station at 2 in the afternoon moved the way money moves, fast, quiet, and without looking back. The first-class corridor was a different world from the main concourse. No food carts, no crying children, no one dragging an oversized suitcase across the marble floor. Here, the lighting was softer. The seats were upholstered in dark leather. A uniformed attendant stood at the entrance to the boarding hall with a tablet in hand, checking names with a smile that never quite reached her eyes. Diana Ashford walked through it all like she owned it because, in a certain sense, she did. Not the station itself, but the kind of ease that came with never having to wait, never having to explain, never having to ask twice. She was 51 years old, dressed in a charcoal travel coat that had been made to measure, and she had not been late to a single appointment in 11 years. Today was no exception. The 2:30 to Harwell would carry her to the most important contract signing of her career, and she intended to be seated composed and reviewing her notes well before the train left the platform. Victor walked one step behind her as he always did. He had been her chief of staff for 6 years. He knew her coffee order, her preferred seat on every rail route between the East Coast cities, and the exact tone of voice she used when she was annoyed but choosing not to show it. He was 54, lean, with silver at his temples, and the particular kind of stillness that either meant deep calm or deep calculation, depending on the day. Most people assumed it was calm. Diana had never had reason to think otherwise. "We're 12 minutes ahead of schedule," he said, glancing at his watch. "The signing team is already on site in Harwell. Everything is in order." Diana gave a short nod. She didn't need reassurance, she needed confirmation, and there was a difference. Victor's phone lit up in his hand. He read something on the screen, then turned the phone face down against his palm before she could glance at it. He said nothing about it. Diana had already looked away. That moment would come back to her later. Marcus Webb had been at the station since 12:15. He wasn't supposed to be anywhere near the first-class corridor. His work order covered the electrical panels in the maintenance corridor on the building's west side, a routine inspection, a couple of relay replacements, nothing that should have taken more than 2 hours. He'd brought Lily because her school had a half-day, and he had no one else to call, which was the kind of math that single fathers learn to do without complaint. She sat on a folding chair he'd set up outside the maintenance room, a library book open in her lap, earbuds, in doing what she always did, watching everything while pretending to read. The work went smoothly until it didn't. One of the panels in the sub-corridor behind the baggage storage turned out to be older than the schematics showed, and Marcus had to push deeper into the maintenance wing to trace the correct circuit. That was how he ended up crouched behind a half-open utility door, tools in hand, close enough to hear 2 men talking in the narrow room on the other side of the wall. He wasn't trying to listen. He just went still the way you do when you realize something is wrong before you can name what it is. The voices were low and deliberate, the voices of men saying things they didn't want carried. "She'll be on the 2:30, confirmed. And the Harwell end. Ready. She won't make it off the platform." A beat of quiet. Then the first voice again. "Nobody's going to ask questions. It'll look like a medical episode. She's been under stress, everyone knows that. The company will be in transition within 48 hours. Marcus stayed absolutely still. He told himself he'd misheard. He told himself it was a script, a phone call for a movie, some kind of misunderstanding. Then he heard a name. Ashford won't know what hit her. He shifted carefully and looked through the gap between the door and the frame. One of the men he didn't recognize heavy-set a maintenance lanyard around his neck that didn't match any of the station's actual crew. The other one he'd seen 20 minutes ago in the first-class corridor, standing next to a woman in a charcoal coat holding a tablet. Marcus pulled back from the door. His chest felt like something had seized up inside it. He was a 38-year-old electrician with a child waiting in the hallway. He had no badge, no authority, and not a single reason anyone in this building would take his word over that of a man who clearly belonged here. He knew exactly how this would go if he walked up to a security officer and said what he'd just heard. He'd spent enough of his life knowing exactly how that went. He gathered his tools. He went back to Lily. She was still in the chair, but the book was closed in her lap now. She held up a small, folded piece of paper. "Someone dropped this," she said. "The man in the nice suit. He walked really fast and it fell out of his pocket." Marcus took it from her and unfolded it. It was a half-sheet printed with a handwritten note in the margin. The printed portion listed a train number, a departure time, and a destination Harwell. The handwritten note at the bottom read, Platform B, 1640. The 2:30 to Harwell was scheduled to arrive in Harwell at approximately 4:15. 1640 was 25 minutes after that, enough time for the train to clear the platform, for the crowd to thin for whatever was waiting there to happen without witnesses. Marcus stood in the hallway for a long moment with the paper in his hand and his daughter watching his face. "Dad," Lily said. "Is something wrong?" He folded the paper and handed it back to her. "Hold on to this. Don't put it down." He picked up his tool bag, and they moved toward the main concourse. Near the junction of the maintenance wing and the public corridor, a custodial worker in a gray uniform was pushing a cart of cleaning supplies, a heavy-set man named Darnell, whom Marcus had worked alongside on 3 previous jobs at this station, and who had a radio clipped to his belt and knew every inch of the building's back corridors. Marcus stopped him with a hand on the cart. "I need you to listen to me," Marcus said low and fast. "I just heard 2 men in the sub-corridor off Base 7 talking about a woman named Ashford. She's on the 2:30. They're planning something at the Harwell end." He held Darnell's eyes. "I'm going to try to stop her from boarding. If I'm not back in the main concourse in 15 minutes, call station security. Not the platform officers, the main security office. Tell them what I told you." Darnell looked at him for a long moment. "You sure about this?" "No," Marcus said. "Make the call anyway." They made it to the first-class boarding corridor with 4 minutes to spare. Marcus saw her immediately. Diana Ashford, moving toward the boarding gate with the ease of someone who had never once been stopped at a door in her life. Victor was just behind her, speaking to one of her assistants in a low voice, his expression smooth and unreadable. Marcus had taken 3 steps in her direction when the nearest security officer moved to intercept him. He sidestepped, raised his voice, and said the only thing he could think of that might actually make her stop, "Don't get on that train." The corridor snapped into silence. Every person in the first-class waiting area turned to look at him. He was aware of exactly what they saw, a black man in a work shirt and steel-toed boots who had no business being in this section of the station, shouting at a woman surrounded by people who were paid to manage exactly this kind of situation. Security closed in. Victor's expression didn't change, which was its own kind of answer. Diana turned around. She looked at Marcus the way she looked at most unexpected variables, with a cool, assessing flatness, the expression of a woman who had learned long ago that the most effective response to disruption was not alarm, but calculation. She was already deciding how much of her time this would cost. The senior security officer stepped between them. "Sir, I'm going to need you to lower your voice and step back." "My name is Marcus Webb," Marcus said, keeping his eyes on Diana. "I'm a contractor. I was in the maintenance corridor on the west side about 40 minutes ago, and I heard 2 men talking about this train. About you. One of them is standing right behind you." Diana didn't move. But something shifted in her posture, a stillness that wasn't dismissal. Victor spoke from behind her, his voice even and practiced. "This is clearly a misunderstanding. We should let security handle it and get to the platform." It was the right thing to say. It was the reasonable thing to say. And yet the moment he said it, Diana found herself thinking about the way he'd turned his phone over without a word. Marcus looked at Lily. The girl stepped forward and held out the folded piece of paper with both hands. Not a performance, just the matter-of-fact offering of a child who has decided to try even when she isn't sure she'll be believed. Diana looked at the piece of paper, then at the child holding it, then at the man standing behind the child who was watching her with an expression that wasn't desperation, wasn't anger, just the particular exhaustion of someone who had done the right thing before and knew exactly what it cost. The boarding attendant's voice came through the corridor speaker. First-class passengers for the 2:30 to Harwell final boarding call begins in 8 minutes. Victor's hand moved slightly toward Diana's elbow, guiding familiar the gesture of a man who had done it 1,000 times. "Diana, we should go." She stepped away from his hand. "Give me the paper," she said to Lily. Lily looked at her father. Marcus gave a small nod. The girl crossed the distance between them and placed the paper in Diana's outstretched hand. Diana unfolded it. She read it. She read it again. The train number was hers. The destination was hers. Platform B1640, 25 minutes after her scheduled arrival in Harwell. Whatever was waiting at that platform, it wasn't nothing. She folded the paper carefully and put it in her coat pocket. "We're not boarding yet," she said. Victor's composure didn't crack. It just became very, very still. "The signing can't be rescheduled. Every party is already in position." "I said we're not boarding yet." Diana turned to the security officer. "I need 5 minutes in a private room. And I need someone to pull the internal camera footage from the maintenance wing on the west side." She glanced once at Marcus, not warmly, not apologetically, but directly. "You, come with me." Marcus looked at his daughter. He put his hand on her shoulder. "Both of you," Diana said. The station manager's office was a small room behind the customer service desk, furnished with 2 chairs, a wall monitor, and the particular atmosphere of a space designed for dealing with problems quietly. A junior security officer stood near the door. Diana sat across the desk from Marcus. She set the folded paper on the desk between them, smoothed it once with 2 fingers, and left it there. Lily sat in the chair beside her father, her hands in her lap, watching everyone. Victor stood near the window, arms loose at his sides, the picture of patient concern. The station manager, a compact man named Gerald, who had clearly not anticipated his afternoon going this direction, pulled up the internal camera system on the wall monitor and began navigating to the west maintenance wing. Marcus walked him through the location, the sub-corridor behind baggage storage, the utility door, the time. Gerald found the right section of footage and scrolled back 45 minutes. The corridor appeared on screen concrete walls, bare bulb lighting a junction of 2 narrow passages. Gerald advanced the footage frame by frame. There was no one there. Not in the corridor. Not in the room Marcus had described. The camera showed an empty hallway for the entire window of time Marcus had specified, with one exception: Marcus himself visible at the far edge of the frame for approximately 20 seconds before moving out of view. Victor's voice was careful and even. "The camera shows nothing, Gerald, and the train departs in—" He checked his watch, 6 minutes. "There was a second door," Marcus said. "The room I was describing had an access point from the other side. The camera's angle wouldn't cover it." Gerald checked. There was, in fact, a second entrance to that utility room. The camera covering that corridor had been offline since that morning. A maintenance log notation confirmed it had been flagged for servicing. Diana looked at the offline camera notation, then at Victor. "That's not unusual," Victor said before she could speak. "Equipment goes down. It's a station." "Diana, the legal team is already in Harwell. The counterparty's lawyers have been waiting since noon. If we miss this window, they walk. 3 years of work walks with them." One of Diana's assistants appeared in the doorway, a young woman named Renata, who had been with the company 2 years and was very good at her job and currently looked like she wanted to be anywhere else. "Ms. Ashford, the conductor's office, is asking for a final confirmation on your boarding." The pressure in the room was real and well-timed. Diana recognized it as pressure. She also recognized that she was the only one in this room who had seen the notation on that paper, Platform B1640, and that no one had yet explained what that meant or who had written it. She looked at Marcus. "The 2 men you heard, the one you recognized, are you certain it was him?" She didn't gesture toward Victor. She didn't need to. "Yes," Marcus said. Victor set his phone on the desk. "Gerald, is there any other footage that might be relevant? Anything that actually shows what this man claims to have witnessed?" Gerald checked 2 more cameras. Both showed nothing useful. The room they were describing sat in a dead zone between 3 camera angles, and the one that should have covered it directly had been offline for hours. Marcus had no recording. He had no second witness. He had a piece of paper with a train number and a time written in someone else's hand and an 8-year-old who had picked it up off the floor. The assistant's voice came again from the doorway. "Ms. Ashford." "I heard you, Renata." Diana's voice didn't rise. It never did, but it cut the room into silence. She sat for a moment looking at the blank section of the camera grid where footage should have been and wasn't. Then she turned to Victor. "Show me your schedule for today, the full calendar." Victor reached for his phone. He unlocked it, navigated to the calendar application, and turned the screen toward her. He was one swipe in the wrong direction. Diana saw it for less than 2 seconds before he corrected and pulled up the calendar, but 2 seconds was enough. A message thread, a name she didn't recognize at the top of the screen, and one visible line of text time-stamped at 2:17, which was 5 minutes after she had checked in at the first-class gate. Confirmed. She's boarding. Move to next phase. Victor turned the screen away. The calendar appeared. Neat, detailed, professional. He looked up at her with the expression of a man presenting an answer. Diana looked back at him with the expression of a woman who had stopped needing the answer about 10 seconds ago. "Victor," she said, "put the phone on the desk." His composure held. That was the thing she would think about later, how completely his composure held even then. He didn't flinch. He didn't rush. He set the phone down on the desk with the deliberate ease of a man who had rehearsed a dozen contingencies and was now simply selecting the right one. "I don't know what you think you saw. Face up," she said. Something passed through his eyes. Not guilt, it was too late for guilt. More like the particular clarity of a person who has just watched one door close and is already moving toward another. He didn't turn the phone over. Diana reached across the desk and turned it over herself. The message thread was still on the screen. Victor's thumb moved toward it, but Gerald was faster. The station manager put his own hand flat on the desk near the phone with the instinct of a man who understood that whatever was on that screen had just become relevant to his station. The thread was visible. 3 messages sent in the last 2 hours. The name at the top read only RH. The most recent message, timestamped at 2:17, read, "Confirmed. She's boarding. Move to next phase." The one before it, sent at 1:53, read, "She's at check-in. Stay ready." And the one before that, from 11:49 that morning, "Package is on site. Harwell confirmed." Diana read all 3 without touching the phone. Then she stood up. Victor stood up at the same moment. "Gerald." Diana said, "Call station security. Now." "Diana." Victor's voice had dropped into something lower and more direct. The practiced smoothness was gone. What replaced it wasn't rage, it was focus. "Think about what you're doing. You have no idea the scale of what's been built over the last 6 years or how many people have a stake in this. This isn't something you can simply—" "Gerald." She didn't look away from Victor. "Now." Gerald reached for the desk phone. Victor looked toward the corridor window, a glance just one, but Marcus caught it. Through the glass partition of the office, visible in the main corridor beyond, 2 men in plain clothes were already moving. Not toward the office, away from it, and to the sides, taking up positions near the 2 exits that led away from the public concourse. One of them was heavy-set with a maintenance lanyard around his neck. Marcus recognized the lanyard. It was the same one he'd seen through the gap in the utility door 40 minutes ago. He was on his feet before he fully understood why. "Lily, get behind me." Lily slid out of her chair. As she moved, her hand swept across the edge of the desk, and she caught the folded paper, the one Diana had set down at the start, and closed her fist around it without breaking stride. She moved behind her father with the quick instinct of a child who had learned to read her father's body before she could read a room. Victor walked to the office door and opened it. He didn't run. He didn't rush. He simply stepped out into the corridor with the authority of a man who had spent 6 years being the person everyone made way for, and the 2 men at the exits began to move inward. Gerald had the desk phone to his ear, speaking in a low, urgent voice to whoever had picked up on the other end. Diana moved toward the door after Victor. Marcus caught her arm, not rough, just firm. "They're cutting off the exits," he said. She looked. She saw. The heavy-set man had reached the junction of the main corridor and the private hallway that connected the station manager's office to the boarding gates. His partner was 20 feet in the other direction near the public entrance hands, in his jacket pockets facing inward. Between the two of them, they'd closed off the obvious routes without drawing a single glance from the passengers moving through the main concourse beyond the glass. Victor was already in the private hallway, gesturing not to Diana, but to the heavy-set man. Diana understood then that she had not been slow to see this. She had simply never before been in a situation where she was the one being moved, rather than the one doing the moving. "We need to go the other way," she said. "There is no other way," Marcus said. "Not from this corridor." He was right. The station manager's office had one door and one window. The window faced an interior wall of glass that looked into the main concourse, sealed and decorative, not operable. Renata was still in the doorway, pressed flat against the doorframe. Her face had gone the color of old paper. The heavy-set man came down the hallway toward them and stopped just inside the office entrance. He wasn't large in the way of someone trying to be threatening. He was large in the way of someone who didn't need to try. His eyes went to Marcus, then to Lily, then back to Marcus. "Step out of the way," he said. He was talking to Marcus, not Diana. It was a specific choice. Marcus didn't move. The man stepped forward and took hold of Lily's arm, not violently, but with a grip that made it very clear she wasn't going anywhere, and pulled her sideways out from behind her father. Lily made a sharp sound. Marcus went completely still. "Nobody's calling anyone," the man said, his eyes moving to Gerald, who had the desk phone pressed to his ear. "Put that down." Gerald did not put it down, but his voice dropped to barely a murmur. The man's grip on Lily's arm didn't loosen. The girl was rigid, her free hand closed tight around the folded piece of paper, knuckles pale. Marcus looked at his daughter. Everything he might have said or done dissolved into the single fact of her face, 8 years old and trying with everything she had not to show how frightened she was. He had come to this station to fix an electrical panel. He had stayed because walking away from something like this wasn't something he was built to do. He had brought his daughter into the middle of it without meaning to, and now a man twice his size had her by the arm and was using her the way powerful people always used the things someone couldn't afford to lose. Diana stood 2 feet away from him, the most powerful woman in the room, and currently the least able to do anything about it. Her authority meant nothing here because the person she had spent 6 years granting authority to had turned it inside out. She looked at Lily, then at Marcus. He wasn't looking at her. He was looking at his daughter, and in his face was the specific devastation of someone who has done everything right and watched it matter exactly as much as he'd feared it would. Victor's voice came from the hallway, composed and final. "Bring them to the service corridor. All of them." The service corridor behind the station manager's office was everything the first-class hall was not: bare concrete. Overhead pipes, the smell of machine oil and recycled air. A single strip of fluorescent lighting ran the length of the ceiling. The walls were close. Sound moved differently here, flatter, more final. Victor stood at one end. Marcus, Diana, Lily, and Renata had been walked to the middle. The heavy-set man remained positioned behind them, one hand still firm on Lily's shoulder. His partner held the far entrance. Gerald had not come with them. Marcus didn't know if that was good or bad, but Darnell had his instructions, and 15 minutes had long since passed. Victor looked at Diana the way someone looks at a problem they've spent a long time solving and are disappointed to still be dealing with. "You were never supposed to be difficult about this," he said. "In 6 years, you never were." Diana's voice, when it came, was very quiet. "In 6 years, you were never this honest." "The deal you're signing in Harwell eliminates every financial instrument we've spent 6 years building into the subsidiary structure." Victor wasn't raising his voice. He sounded, if anything, tired. 12 people. 12 people who trusted that the architecture we built would hold. You were going to dismantle it with one signature and call it good governance. "It is good governance," Diana said. "It's also legal, and it was my decision to make." "It was," Victor said. Until it wasn't. He didn't elaborate. He didn't need to. The corridor made the meaning clear enough. Marcus was not looking at Victor. He was looking at the strip of fluorescent light above them and thinking about Darnell, about a conversation in a maintenance hallway that had lasted 45 seconds and had been the only real preparation he'd had for any of this. He had no way of knowing if it had been enough. He had to believe it had been. Victor turned to the heavy-set man and gave a short nod, the nod of a man closing a tab, settling an account. Lily made a small sound. Not a cry, something tighter than that, the sound of a child pressing everything down into a very small space. Marcus looked at her. Her jaw was clenched, eyes dry. She still had the paper in her fist. That image, his daughter standing in a concrete corridor, because he had not been able to walk away from a stranger's life, landed in his chest like something irreversible. He turned toward the far end of the corridor. "Darnell!" His voice hit the concrete walls and came back at him from 3 directions. "Darnell, it's Marcus West Service Corridor. I need you right now." The heavy-set man took a step forward. Victor said, "That's enough. Darnell." The door at the far end of the corridor swung open. 2 uniformed station security officers came through first. Behind them, a plainclothes officer with a badge on her belt moved in, low and fast eyes already scanning the corridor before she'd fully cleared the frame. The heavy-set man spun. His partner at the near entrance made the wrong calculation. He stepped forward instead of back, which put him directly in the path of a second officer coming through from the public concourse side. Victor didn't run. That was the last surprising thing about him, that when it ended, he simply stood in the middle of the corridor with his arms at his sides like a man who had already decided this was how it would go and saw no reason to make it worse. The plainclothes officer moved past Marcus and Diana without a word and went directly to Victor. "Sir, I need you to keep your hands where I can see them." Victor kept his hands where she could see them. The heavy-set man released Lily's shoulder. She crossed the space between them and pressed herself into Marcus's side, and he closed his arm around her and held on. Well, the next 2 hours happened the way these things do, in fragments, in waiting rooms, in repetition. Statements were given. Victor's phone was taken into evidence. The message thread was extracted and documented 3 messages to a contact identified from a number registered under a shell entity with corresponding replies. The 2 men from the corridor were taken separately. The plainclothes officer, a detective named Hale, who had the manner of someone who had heard every version of every story, said they would talk. The detail about Platform B 1640 was confirmed within hours. A man had been stationed at the Harwell arrival platform, positioned to intercept Diana after the train cleared. He was picked up before the 2:30 even reached its destination. The 2:30 to Harwell left without Diana Ashford on it. The signing was postponed by 48 hours. 12 months later, financial coverage would describe it as the decision that prevented a catastrophic misalignment of corporate assets, though the coverage would focus on Diana's judgment and say nothing about an electrician named Marcus Webb or a piece of paper carried by his daughter. Victor's network, as it turned out, was exactly as extensive as he'd described. 6 additional people, months of investigation, 3 more arrests. None of that happened in the station. In the station, when it was over, there was just a waiting room with plastic chairs and a coffee machine and the specific exhaustion of people who had been inside an emergency and come out the other side of it. Renata sat 2 chairs away from the door, her hands folded in her lap, staring at nothing in particular with the expression of someone restructuring every assumption they'd had about their job. She hadn't said much since the corridor. No one had asked her to. Duck. Marcus sat with Lily in the chairs nearest the door. She had her head against his arm and the paper folded in her lap. She had not said much since they'd left the corridor. Neither had he. There was a kind of quiet between them that didn't need filling. Diana came in from the hallway. She'd been on a call. Marcus had seen her through the glass standing very still the way she stood when she was managing something large and complicated. Now she walked to where they were sitting and stood in front of them. Lily looked up. Diana lowered herself to sit in the chair directly across from Lily. Not at an adult angle, not 1 seat removed, but square in front of the girl at her level. It was a deliberate choice. The kind a person makes when they have decided consciously to take up less space than they're used to. Her eyes went to the folded paper in Lily's lap. "Can I see it one more time?" she said. Lily looked at her father. Marcus gave a small nod. She picked up the paper and held it out with both hands, the same way she'd offered it at the boarding gate, without ceremony, without expectation. Diana took it. She turned it over, once looked at the handwritten margin note, Platform B 1640, and then at the train number printed above it. She didn't speak for a moment. She was looking at the paper, the way you look at something you nearly didn't take seriously and are only now fully understanding what that would have cost. Then she folded it carefully along its original crease and held it back out to Lily. "You should keep this," Diana said. Lily took it and tucked it into the front pocket of her jacket. Diana watched her do it. Then she looked up at Marcus. He was watching her with the same expression he'd had at the boarding gate, not asking for anything, not waiting for anything. Just present in the way of someone who had stopped expecting and was simply here. "What's your name?" Diana said. He looked at her steadily. "Marcus Webb." She said it quietly, the way you say a name when you've realized you should have asked it much earlier and you're making sure this time that you won't forget it. "Marcus." She held his eyes. "Thank you." He didn't say you're welcome because the situation was larger than that and both of them knew it. He gave a small nod enough. Outside the waiting room window, the platform was empty. The 2:30 was long gone. The afternoon light was coming through the high station windows at a long angle, the kind of light that arrives at the end of things and makes everything look briefly, quietly different. Lily leaned her head back against her father's arm. Diana sat across from them in a plastic chair in a waiting room, which was not where she had expected to be at this hour, and for the first time in a very long time, she was not thinking about what came next. She was just sitting with the particular stillness of a person who has been shown in the most direct way possible that the voices worth listening to rarely arrive with credentials. Some truths don't come with titles. Some of them come in work shirts with a child beside them holding a piece of paper they almost threw away. And the only difference between the ones that save you and the ones you never hear is whether you stop long enough to listen.